Welcome. If this is your first time, I don't know if you, I guess Natalie let the cat out of the bag. If you're watching online or you just tuned in, this is the second part of our series. It might get loud, and if you missed last week, well, today won't make a whole lot more sense. You're kind of like, what? And you could catch up on our YouTube page, and I'll just kind of let you know again, if you haven't heard, that we are so excited to be able to plant a campus in Cozad. And last week was kind of the what of that and the big announcement of that. Today is the why and the how. So the why and the how, and how are we going to do this, and why are we going to do this? And it's so kind of interesting. Why plant another church? Wasn't planting one hard enough? And the answer to that is, it was hard to plant this church. It took an enormous effort, sacrifice, and time, and it will require all of that going forward as well as we continue to do this. So, the reason why is really personal to me. Because in many ways, Jesus used the church to save my life. In so many ways, Jesus used the church to save my life. Now, Jesus saved my soul, and Jesus used the church to communicate my condition in this world and my need for Him, but it's so much more than that. So I have eternal life, and that is an amazing, awesome thing, but there's so much more than that. See, it wasn't like I was going down this, horrible path, and I was addicted to, cocaine or heroin or, all of this stuff, and I was making horrible, destructive decisions. It wasn't that at all. In fact, one of the main reasons I didn't go down that road was because of the church and the influence that the church had on me and has had on me. And some may say, I can't imagine where I'd be without the influence of the local church on my life. I know exactly where I'd be. I know exactly, because I know me. I know me, and if I wouldn't have grown up in the environment that I grew up in, if I hadn't been a part of a local church as I was going through junior high and high school and continuing into my college years, in fact, my entire life, I've been in church. I've been a part of church. It has had an enormous impact on my life, and I know exactly where I would be. And it has prevented so much baggage, so much stuff that I would, have a hard time getting rid of, and I would be carrying with me had I not been a part of a local church. See, the local church, it informed my conscience. It informed my conscience of things that were right and things that were wrong. And sometimes in America, I think we take this for granted. Where did you learn all of that? Where did that come from? See, when I was growing up, I was taught that to view young ladies as sisters, as my sisters, not as objects of lust. See, that was a completely different message from my locker room to my home and the church. Because the locker room was, how many girls can you be with? And the entire, goal of the locker room was to have sex with as many girls as possible because they're good looking, and the goal is, let's see if we can get them in bed. Two completely different views. Where did I learn that? It wasn't in the locker room. I guarantee it's probably not in your workplace. Where in society is this being taught? In the local church. That's where I learned that. See, I learned in the local church, and I just got to say up front, in case you're wondering, this isn't going to be much of a sermon. Okay, maybe it sounds like one, but it's not really much of a sermon, but a little bit, okay? Just enough so you can say it was a sermon. But I learned in the local church that I was accountable to my Heavenly Father for how I treated everyone. I learned that in the local church. I learned that I was accountable to God for how I treated everyone, and every single person no matter how different of a background they had than me, no matter what their political view was different than me, no matter what their race was different than me. Every single person I come eyeball to eyeball with is someone for whom Jesus died on the cross for, and he loves them deeply, and he calls me to do the same. Where do you learn that? You learn that in the news? You learn that in the locker room? You learn that in the work? Where do you learn this? I learned it in the local church. That's where I learned it. See, I learned in the local church that you don't ever get away with sin. I learned you don't ever really get away with sin. Each sin comes prepackaged with a penalty. Every sin comes prepackaged with a penalty. Now, I learned this in church, and then I tested it, and I learned it by experience as well. And I'll bet you did too. But I learned this in the local church. Did I skip one? Oh, no, I didn't. Good job, Eric. I learned in the local church that I was to forgive, to confess, and to make restitution. Where do we learn this in society? What other place, what other institution, what other organization is teaching this in society? Where do we get this? See, I learned it in the local church. I'm so, unbelievably grateful. See, it taught me how not to hold on to anger. I know exactly where I would be had I not had the influence of the local church. I would be a very angry individual. And that anger would leak out of me on my family, on my friends, at my coworkers. It would leak out of me everywhere. And the older you get, if you do not learn how to forgive and how to confess, I'm just telling you, you just become an angry old person. So where do you learn that? Learn it in the local church. See, I learned in the local church that to hold on to bitterness and anger and resentment, it's like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. That doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? But that's what it is. See, when you don't understand anger, and you don't understand how God's made this world to work, and you don't understand that Jesus came along and gave us an antidote to anger and resentment and bitterness. He gave us an antidote for each one of those things. But where are you going to be taught that? Except in the local church. See, many of you have told me that you wished that you would have heard what I have taught when you were young. I did. When I hear, man, I so wish I would have heard that when I was a teenager. I heard it. When I hear, man, in college, there was a couple of that spring break. Oh my God. And there's some regrets that happened back in those days. And in fact, they're all kind of foggy, a little bit foggy. And I wished I would have heard that back then. I heard it. In fact, I've heard these things my entire life. And it has prevented so much garbage and baggage in my life. And it has helped me to be emotionally healthy, to be relationally healthy. But I learned so much of it. In my family? Yes, but where was my family learning it? In the local church. See, it's not just about what we are teaching the next generation, it's about what we're preventing. If you're concerned about this next generation, if you're concerned about our nation, if you're concerned where we might be going, it's not just, teaching them some things, it's so much of what we would be preventing and all of the baggage. I was reminded that, it's just incredible what God is doing. So there was over 30 young adults that gathered when they launched. They gathered in Barry and Tanya's home. Well, their living room holds about 24. So we're like stacking them too deep. And so Barry's like, dude, can we come over to your house again? Because they come, Wednesday night, so now they're coming Monday night. And I'm like, absolutely, come on over. We have young adults. We have young adults coming from Wellfleet, from Thetford, from Broken Bow. Why? Where else are they going to go? And all of these towns that they're coming from, they don't have anything for them, for that age group. And yeah, we're teaching them some stuff, but I so want them to be prevented from having to experience the pain of so much baggage that some of you would say, if I could go back, I would do it so much different. And I would put myself in that local church where I would have my conscience informed of how God's made this world to work. See, because of the crossing, Jen and I had a partner in raising our children. This church has had a profound impact on my children. Profound, beyond anything that I could even say or express. From Nan and Leo, to Curtis and Arlene, to Dustin and Aaron, to Jafili and Barry, having a profound, profound impact on my children. We had a partner. We had a partner coming along. It wasn't just us saying it to our children. We had other people. And when other people are saying the same things that the parent is saying, somehow or another, they listen to the other person when they're not listening to the parents. And they partnered with us. And I'm telling you what, now I get to enjoy the benefits of it, of watching my young adult children love the church. Love the church. See, we think that children should love going to church. We think children should love the church. One of the things I can't understand, I can't seem to wrap my mind around, is why in the world parents would go to a church that their children hate and they're content raising them in a church that their children hate, knowing full well when their children leave, they're going to continue to hate the church. Parents, don't take your children to a church your children hate. It just teaches them to hate the church, and then they can't wait to leave, and they never come back. And you know what? When they do come back, because eventually you come back, and you know why they come back? Because life beats the living out of them. You know why? Because they're figuring out how God's made the world to work, and they just think there's got to be something more. But by that time, there's just so much baggage that could have been prevented had they grown up in a healthy church. We think children should love the local church, not hate it. My closest friends in this world were made because of the local church. I have some amazing friends, and every single one of them I met because of a local church. And it was in those contexts that we met and to this day have unbelievable, positive, godly, Christ-like influence in my life. You see, the church taught me how to be generous. See, it is so difficult. It is so difficult to teach adults how to be generous. If you didn't grow up in a church and you didn't grow up, learning to tithe, to give a percentage of your income, and that's just not how you were raised as an adult, it's unbelievably difficult to get adults to become generous. And you're like, well, wait a second, Eric. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a fundraiser for prom, and they were selling burritos, and we bought a dozen burritos for $20. Okay, that's not generosity, all right? See, that's what we think. We're like, well, here's a 20. That's not generosity. Until you pre-decide a percentage of your income that I'm going to pre-decide to give that away. That's generosity. And see, it comes easy for us because that's just the way it always was. And we grew up that way. And I had great parents who modeled that for us. Unbelievable generosity. See, by the grace of God, over the last 29 years that Jen and I have been married, we have been able to give hundreds of thousands of dollars away. And we don't miss it. We don't miss it. In fact, there was one time in the early part of this church when we were just like struggling financially and trying to raise some money to have a facility that we took, Jen and I was like, man, you know what? Maybe we could go 4 months and just give our salary back to the church. So we went 4 months without a salary. It was unbelievably hard. My kids, this was how bad it was. We went from the 10-inch tortilla to the 8-inch tortilla. I'm serious. It's like, we're in. And my children got to witness that. See, they grew up. Where did we learn that? And I'm telling you, if someone would come along and say, Eric, hey, we figured out a way to give you back all of the money that you and Jen have given over all the years, but here's the caveat. It would undo all of the good. Forget it. Forget it. We don't miss any of it. And so we're so grateful and joy to be able to give it. But where did we learn that? In the local church. It's where we learned it. See, we have the message of eternal life because of Jesus. But it doesn't just stop there, guys. We have the message of a better life here on earth. And we have a responsibility to carry that on and to proclaim that. And not just, have one church and say, yay, we're done, but how can we continue to have influence beyond just these 4 walls? As far as a nation, this is so true. And you are watching this unfold before your very eyes. Strong church, strong nation. Weak church, weak nation. And we have a responsibility to do our part, to do everything that we know to do, to bring the church back to a place where it would be strong in this nation again. Because right now it is not. But may it be, again, and may we not be content to just say, well, I guess it just isn't. But actually do something about it. So, that's a little bit of the why. And then some scripture here in a little bit. But here's some of the how. And I want you to think in terms of steps. And I didn't say step 1, step 2, step 3, although these are kind of linear, but they're kind of, the reason I didn't do step 1, step 2, step 3 is because these overlap with one another, okay? So I didn't want you to think, okay, we got to get step 1 done, and then we move on to step 2. Step 2 is, it kind of integrates with step 1 and so forth, okay? So here is the plan. Plan number 1, and if you're wondering if I was serious about putting ourselves in a position of dependence on God, well, I'm going to answer that question for you right here. Because this first part of our step is to pay off the mortgage. And I would love to do that by year's end. And so that's going to require, and it's just going to be a God thing. And I want you to watch the works of God before your very eyes. And I'm going to ask, see, God hasn't promised me that he's going to help us pay the mortgage off by year's end. Do you remember faith? Okay, he hasn't promised that. So I'm going to ask him, God, here's the faith part of that. God, I know you're able because you own it all. Would you be willing? I just don't know if you'd be willing. So I'm asking if you'd be willing. Okay? The mortgage is $525,000. It's a mountain. And here's the thing. Here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want all of you to say, okay, I'm going to take everything that I've been giving and start giving it to the mortgage. I don't want you to do that, okay? We are still trying to do ministry. Shane would love to eat, okay? And so we still want to continue to do ministry. And so this is going to require some sacrifice. This is going to require us saying, hey, we want to continue to fund the ministry that is going on in the life of this church. But above and beyond that, what can we do? And it's going to require sacrifice from all of us. But there's some individuals in this room, and there's some individuals who are watching online. There's some individuals a part of this church that have a different pocket. And I am asking if you would reach deep into that other pocket and that you would give some chunks. And I'm asking, some of you farmers, would you be willing not to buy a combine at the end of this year for next year? No, I'm serious. You're going to make some big money. And you got to make decisions of where that's going to go. And I fully understand, the economy has been unbelievably difficult in farming for a few years. But you got to make some decisions, and there's some extra. If there's some extra, would you be willing to give that to pay this off? And so this is a huge step. If we're going to be able to successfully plant a church, we need to be able to be financially in a place where we have some margin. Just in case there's like another, pandemic or something that comes along. See, we've got to be able to be financially in a place where we can take a hit if a hit comes. And this is a huge piece of that. All right. We need everyone to go through Engage. What is Engage? Engage is something that is going to be brand new. It is something that we are currently putting together. It is a comprehensive a series of teaching that goes for 4 weeks. 4 weeks, and it's something that we would like people that walk through the door for the first time. Their next step is to go to Engage. And it's going to happen after church. It'll involve lunch. You're like, I'm in. All right, lunch. I'm in. And it goes for 4 weeks. So we'll always, as we move forward, we will always continue to do Engage. And we will do it in this campus, and we will do it at the Cozad campus for everyone who is new. And so we go through the same thing in week 1 of the month, week 2 of the month, week 3 of the month, week 4 of the month. So if someone comes week 3 and they're, hey, can I start coming? Absolutely. You know what? You can catch up. And so the reason this is so important is we have taught bits and pieces of this, but I guarantee you, every single one of you probably in this room and those of you watching online, you have gotten bits and pieces, but you haven't gotten the whole thing. And as we move forward, we've got to be on the same page, to have the same mind and purpose as we move forward, so we're all on the same page. It's unbelievably important for the unity of this church. And so I would love it. And so this is going to start in October. And so we're going to do it in October and November, and then we'll probably do it again, and then we'll skip December and go to January, and then we're just going to keep doing it every single month. So I would love it if the entire church would go through it. Some of it's going to be stuff that you already know, or you've already learned, or that language is familiar to you, but there's going to be some stuff that you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And so it's important for us to be on the same page. All right, invest and invite. I need you to invest and invite like crazy. I need you to invest relationally in the life of your friends for the sake of eternity, and then invite them. Gothenburg people, I need you to invest and invite. I need you to invest and invite. And here's the reason why. Cozad people, I need you to invest and invite. We already have almost 50 adults coming from Cozad. Our goal is to raise that to 75 adults when we launch, and we will have a launch team of 75 adults. So when they launch with children, they're going to have 100 and 125. If they get really busy, it could be 150. But there's going to be, when you launch and you have 100 to 150 people, is that momentum? Yeah, that's momentum. Trust me, we started with no people. So, that's the hard way to start. We want to give them instant momentum. And so we're going to send that launch team to Cozad, but we want that to be a team that has 75 adults. So I need you to invest and invite. But Gothenburg people, that's going to leave a void here, right? And so I need you to invest and invite so that when we launch that team, we filled right back into that void. And the things that those folks were doing here and serving here, and then they're going to go there and do those things over there. We've got people in place to just step right in and keep going without a beat. Okay? So invest and invite. All right. We need to identify possible meeting locations. And I know some of you, Cozad people, you've been messaging me with different possible, solutions to this. And so we're gonna be identifying that place. We don't have that place yet. We don't know what that is going to be yet. And so it's just something to pray about. We have some ideas of what we would like to do, but we don't have permission to do those things yet. And so we will be seeking that. Okay, so in my timeline, if everything went the way that I want it, and I would just give you this caveat, nothing has ever gone the way that I've wanted it, okay? All right, so when I say, in a timeline of this is the way that I would love it to go, if it went exactly the way I want it, me, like you, you have your plans, and then God's like, okay, well, I have my plan, and so it could very well be different. But so by year's end, to be able to know where we're meeting, to have the mortgage paid off, to be able to invest and invite, all of those pieces are happening. All right? And then to raise 1 year's campus expenses. And here's the thing. We have some other ministries outside of this church that are waiting and want to help. But they want to see if we're willing and if we're bought in and we're going to take ownership of it by paying the mortgage off. So they're just sitting back and they're going to wait and see what we do. And they will know whether we're bought in or whether we're not. And so this piece, yes, we want to raise that in-house, but we have some other ministries that are going to be willing to come along and help as well. This piece is going to be probably $200,000 to $300,000. So we have the expenses for 1 year already raised for staff, for rent, for sound equipment, light equipment, and all of the stuff that makes what you see every single week and don't think anything about it happen. Okay? All right. Identify a campus pastor, worship pastor, and children's director. So how is the staffing all going to work? Okay? I want to identify that campus pastor early in the process, because when we start to do training with this launch team next spring, I want that campus pastor to be a part of all of that, so that I don't do all of the training and I'm not the one who builds trust and camaraderie and all of that has to take place, and then hand the baton off to someone that you haven't even met and say, okay, now follow him. Okay? So to identify that individual and have them on board and a part of the training that we will do with that launch team is so important. We are going to move John Jaffili to youth, and he will oversee youth of both campuses and oversee Catalyst Sunday night and Catalyst Wednesday night. I don't know if you know this, but there are small groups, there are high school groups that are meeting in Gothenburg, in Brady, in Eustis Farnham, and in Cozad now. Did you just hear that? That's unbelievable. That's incredible. Okay, so he's going to move into that role as we move into this phase. Okay, and then we would hire a worship pastor who would oversee both campuses, build teams for both campuses, do all of the scheduling for both campuses, and then there will just be a leader that he would raise up that would do the Cozad or Gothenburg campus. They can they could switch back and forth, but the worship will be live at both campuses. Okay. The worship will be live at both campuses. And then we want a children's director. You know why? Because we want children to love the local church. And I'm just telling you, it's going to be a huge, huge piece of this launch. And so to have someone that we can buy their time to dedicate themselves to doing an amazing job with amazing environments for children. We want to be able to do that. All right? Then we will gather the launch team and begin training. In my thought process, this is next spring, but we're just going to see what God does, okay? I would love it if this was next spring, but we'll just see how God does and how we're doing and making progress in our steps, okay? Purchase necessary equipment and make any changes necessary to the secured location. And when I come back to the training, I'm talking about training for guest services, I'm talking about training for children, I'm talking about training for sound, I'm talking about training for tech, I'm talking about training for every single aspect of making an amazing environment for guests. Okay? And then purchasing this necessary equipment. I'm just telling you, stuff's expensive. If you're gonna do church to reach the next generation, it's expensive stuff. Okay? And so just being able to do that and make those purchases and being able to be ready, so when we launch, we are ready to launch. One of the things that amazes me is so many restaurants, when they launch, aren't ready to launch. And what happens in a small town when a restaurant's not ready to launch? And it takes hours to get your food, and there's not enough servers, and the guest service experience is not very good. Guess what happens? Word gets out real quick, doesn't it? Yes, it does. And so, week one, we want to be everyone knows exactly what's going on, so that, hey, when we launch, it's an amazing experience for guests. And then launch. Ready to go and do this, okay? So, one church, multiple locations. One church, multiple locations, live worship at both locations, message sometimes live at Gothenburg campus and sometimes live at Cozad campus. And depending on where it's live, it'll be streamed to the other campus. Both campuses, live worship, but it could be the communicator could be live in one campus and streamed to the other. Communicator could be live in the other one. And just to let you know what? Jafili and Cody and I just went and experienced this whole thing at another church that is doing this currently in a rural context. And I was telling you, it was seamless and it was amazing. And this is the way. And I'm telling you, there's an adjustment that has to be made, but it's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. It's amazing. And the reason we don't want that campus pastor to be preaching every single week, why take two guys and put them at the 1 yard line and ask them to drive the field every single week when one guy can start at the 1 yard line, drive at the field, and the other guy can be in the community building relationships? See, we just think that's amazing. In fact, Cozad's going to have an advantage over Gothenburg because there's more time for that campus pastor to just be in the community, building relationships, and not having to take 20, 30 hours every week to build a message. So that's kind of how that will go. One church, multiple locations, one leadership team, one brand, one philosophy of ministry and approach. Okay? This is why we won't take another church in Cozad and just say, hey, you want to be a campus? No. One leadership team, one brand, one philosophy of ministry. It will be the Crossing Fellowship in Cozad, just like it's the Crossing Fellowship. And if you, when we're all done, you walk into both campuses, you're like, this looks just like the other campus. Yes, it will. Okay? All right. I am 5 minutes over time. So let me just read these verses real quick to you. Matthew 9, Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogue and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. So he's going around teaching all of these various towns, just like he's called the church to do. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion. And why did he have compassion on them? Because they were confused and helpless. They didn't grow up in the church. They didn't have the influence of the church, and they didn't know how God made the world to work. And they just, you know what? They didn't know how marriage worked. They didn't know how they were supposed to treat one another. It was just like they were like sheep without a shepherd. It sounds like me and what I would have been without the local church. He said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. Connotation, if we had more workers, if the church was involved, if there was more of the church involved, it's never a harvest issue, it's always a worker issue. It's always, will the church engage? That's the question, because the harvest is there. And so Jesus just says, hey, guys, I want you to pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest and ask him what? To send more workers into his fields. To send the church into the fields. So Crossing. For some of you, depending on your temperament, you're scared out of your mind right now. And here's the thing. Here's an opportunity for you to step into faith. And position yourself in a place of saying, oh God, this is unbelievable. It's exciting, but scary. I've never been in this place before. It's a great place to be. For others of you, change is no big deal for you, and this is just exciting. And so no matter how it lands on you, I just pray, if you're not already getting on your knees every day to pray about this, I hope that this causes you to do that. And then we all have some things to do. So let's get after it.